Hello and welcome to Investment Insight. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's break down what's happening in the markets today in a clear and simple way. So, imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that the price of, well, basically everything.
I get everything.
Yeah, from your next smartphone to your monthly electricity bill just went up by 20%.
Just overnight.
Exactly. And all because of a few, quiet handshakes that happened halfway across the world. Today, we are taking a deep dive into something that it might look like just distant political theater on the evening news.
But it's really not.
No, it's not. It's actually a massive, calculated rewiring of the entire global economy. We're looking at China's recent diplomatic blitz during the ongoing crisis in the Middle East.
Yeah, and it is a perfect example of why we have to look past the podium and, really look at the pipeline.
Pipeline, right.
Because if you scroll through the headlines right now, you're seeing a lot of high-minded talk from Beijing about global peace, stability, international cooperation.
Yeah. It sounds great on paper.
It does. But based on recent economic analysis, there is just a massive gap between this diplomatic window dressing and where the actual billions of dollars are flowing.
So our goal today is to help you, the listener, cut through all that political noise and see the economic machinery moving underneath it all.
Exactly.
I've been trying to wrap my head around their strategy, and I keep coming back to this analogy. So imagine you have this really ambitious neighborhood watch captain.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. And suddenly there's some major drama on the block. People are arguing. Maybe a fence gets knocked over.
Total chaos.
Yeah. And this captain is going door to door, smiling, handing out these glossy flyers about, peace, stability, looking out for each other.
Right.
But if you watch what they are actually doing while everyone else is distracted by the fighting, they aren't just patrolling the streets. They are quietly buying up all the prime real estate on the block and, securing their own private water lines.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. I mean, China is actively presenting itself to the world as the new, responsible, global peacemaker.
Right, the good guy.
But beneath that very carefully crafted public narrative, there's a defensive, highly aggressive economic strategy playing out.
Yeah.
We aren't just looking at peace talks here.
What are we looking at then?
We are looking at an attempt to fundamentally bypass the traditional Western financial hubs.
Okay, let's get into the actual events because the timeline of these meetings is just wild. So, in a very condensed window in mid-April, Beijing hosted a massive sequence of international leaders.
It was a very busy month.
Oh, totally. Let's start with the Middle East. China's leader, Xi Jinping, meets with the UAE Crown Prince. And out of this meeting, China rolls out what they proudly call their 4-point peace plan for the Middle East.
And if you read the text of that plan, the language is incredibly deliberate.
I mean, it sounds like a greeting card. The 4 points are peaceful coexistence, respecting national sovereignty, following international law, and balancing development with security.
Very broad strokes.
Yeah, who is going to argue with that? But here is my issue with it. There are zero actual details.
Run.
There is no map for a ceasefire. There are no penalties if a country breaks the rules. There's no independent verification.
Right.
It feels exactly like a politician standing on a stage promising good things for everyone and lower taxes without ever once explaining the math of how they're actually going to pay for it.
Oh, completely.
So I genuinely don't understand this. If it's not a real actionable peace plan, why make such a massive global spectacle of it?
Well, because it's not about creating a functional peace treaty. It's about managing a severe domestic vulnerability.
A domestic vulnerability in China.
Exactly. You have to look at what is happening back on the factory floors in China. According to recent trade data, China's natural gas imports in March dropped to their lowest levels since October 2022.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and their crude oil imports fell by nearly 3%. And most importantly, geopolitical tensions meant that actual Chinese cargo ships were physically delayed or stuck in the Strait of Hormuz.
Oh, man. So the manufacturing base that runs their entire economy was literally watching its fuel gauge drop toward empty.
That is the reality. I mean, China is not stepping into the Middle East out of a sudden moral calling to be a peacemaker.
Right.
They are stepping in because their entire economic engine, every factory, every export hub, requires a massive, uninterrupted flow of energy from the Gulf. If the Middle East burns, the lights go out in Beijing.
So this peace plan is fundamentally a self-interested defensive maneuver to protect their energy supply lines.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about keeping the lights on. But looking at the agreements that actually came out of that UAE meeting, they went way beyond just negotiating safe passage for oil tankers.
They did, and this is the mechanic that everyday American investors really need to understand.
Okay, break it down for us.
The diplomatic peace meeting was essentially a Trojan horse to lock in massive futuristic economic deals. While the global media was debating the four-point plan, China and the UAE were quietly shaking hands on expanding Etihad Airways flight routes.
Okay, flights, sure.
But more importantly, they locked in massive joint investments for artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, and hydrogen energy. They're even moving aggressively to finalize a free trade agreement with the Gulf countries.
Wait, let me pause you right there. Why AI and electric vehicles? I understand buying oil, but why is China building the UAE's tech infrastructure?
Because it fundamentally changes the power dynamic of the relationship. Think about how AI infrastructure actually works.
Okay.
If China installs the servers, the facial recognition software for smart cities, the algorithms that run the UAE's power grids and traffic systems,
Oh, wow.
right, all of that data and operational control is ultimately tethered back to Chinese tech firms.
It's like offering to install your neighbor's brand new smart home security system and solar panels for free,
Yes.
knowing that because you control the software updates, they will never, ever cut off your access to the shared community wealth.
That's exactly it. They are transforming the relationship from a simple transaction like we give you cash, you give us crude oil,
Right.
into a permanent technological marriage. If the Gulf's future economic infrastructure is built on Chinese code and Chinese hardware, those countries are highly incentivized to make sure China always gets the energy it needs. It is long-term supply chain insurance.
That is a brilliant, if, slightly terrifying strategy. Now, this naturally raises a massive question about the rest of the world.
Yeah.
If China is aggressively locking down energy and tech dominance in the Middle East while the traditional U.S.-led order is distracted, how are they handling the West? Because right in the middle of all this, Xi Jinping takes a meeting with Europe.
Yes, the European angle reveals a completely different but equally aggressive tactic.
Right. So around the same time as the UAE talks, Xi Jinping meets with the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez.
Mhm.
And Sanchez actually comes out and publicly says Europe and China should get closer to defend multilateralism. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping uses the meeting to declare that the international order is collapsing.
It's a bold statement.
I have to stop and ask here, why on earth is Spain, a major European economy and a core NATO ally, cozying up to Beijing right now? Are they just trying to exploit the fact that the U.S. has its hands full?
Well,
Because let's be real, with President Trump currently in the White House emphasizing a very strict America First approach to trade and manufacturing, are European countries just shopping around for a better deal?
I wouldn't call it simply shopping around for a better deal. For a country like Spain, it is about sheer economic survival.
Really? Survival?
Yeah, it is about plugging a massive hole in a sinking ship. We can understand this through the strategy of selective re-engagement. If you look at the raw trade figures, Spain is currently bleeding capital to Beijing.
How bad is it?
They are sitting on a nearly $50 billion trade deficit with China.
Oh my gosh, that is an astonishing amount of money flowing in one direction.
Mhm.
They are buying $50 billion more in goods from China than they are selling back.
Right. And Spain is desperate to balance those books. They want access to the Chinese middle class to sell more of their agricultural products, things like premium pork and wine, and they desperately want Chinese capital to fund their local green infrastructure.
So when the Spanish Prime Minister talks about defending multilateralism, what does that actually mean in plain English?
Well, multilateralism is essentially polite diplomatic code for we don't want the United States to be the only superpower making all the global financial rules.
Ah,
China knows it cannot win over the entirety of the European Union.
right.
I mean, the EU as a whole is too fractured on security issues and human rights to embrace Beijing uniformly.
Right, they'd never all agree.
Exactly. So China doesn't even try. Instead, they selectively pick off individual countries like Spain that are economically hungry and carrying massive deficits.
This is a stark wake-up call for any American trying to make sense of the news. We have this habit of thinking about the West or Europe as this, unified team that always wears the same jersey and plays by the same playbook.
It's a common misconception.
But at the end of the day, global trade isn't a team sport. If a country like Spain has a $50 billion hole in its economy and the U.S. is focused on protecting its own domestic manufacturing, China just has to stand there with an open checkbook.
And China leverages that open checkbook masterfully for their public relations. When Xi Jinping makes his grand statements about the U.S.-led international order collapsing, having a prominent European leader standing right next to him, nodding along, it gives that narrative immense global credibility.
Yeah, it elevates it from just a Chinese state talking point to a shared international concern.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have China playing the benevolent peacemaker and tech partner in the Middle East, and they are playing the generous infrastructure investor in Europe. But here is where the narrative completely falls apart, Schnee. It is a glaring contradiction.
Okay, let's hear.
China is telling the UAE and Spain that they are the ultimate champions of stability and international law. But right after these meetings, who is the very next person welcomed into Beijing?
The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov.
Exactly. They sit down with Lavrov, and according to the reports, Russia offers to supply China with even more energy to make up for any shortfalls from the Middle East. And Xi Jinping publicly praises the stability and certainty of the China-Russia relationship.
It's a lot to juggle.
I just don't get how they balance this.
It is the ultimate tightrope act.
Yeah.
And it is the exact reason why Washington and its allies will never truly accept China as a neutral peacekeeper.
Right.
You cannot logically claim to be the neutral arbiter of international law while simultaneously deepening a massive economic and strategic partnership with a country that is actively trying to dismantle that same international law through conflict.
It totally breaks the neighborhood watch analogy we used earlier. It's more like a slick bank CEO who goes on television to lecture everyone about the importance of strict financial regulations and market stability, while secretly running a massive, unregulated crypto laundering scheme out the back door at the bank.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it. By purchasing massive quantities of Russian energy, China is providing a critical financial lifeline to Moscow.
Yeah.
But from Beijing's perspective, this isn't a contradiction. It is a necessary dual strategy. They are managing their immediate pressing energy crisis by keeping Russia incredibly close.
While also managing their brand.
Exactly. While simultaneously managing their long-term diplomatic brand by preaching peace to Europe and the Gulf.
Which brings us to the final piece of this global puzzle, and honestly, the piece that probably has the most direct impact on the future of the American economy. Right alongside these high-profile meetings, Xi Jinping also held talks with Vietnam's president.
Yes. And if you want to understand where the global economy is heading over the next 20 years, this is the meeting to watch.
Based on the analysis, this meeting had absolutely nothing to do with crude oil, and it wasn't about international peace treaties. It was highly technical. They were discussing semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and heavily integrating their digital and physical supply chains. Why the sudden pivot to tech with Vietnam?
Because while we often get distracted by the high-stakes political drama in the Middle East or, the glaring contradictions with Russia, the real long-term wealth generation is happening in Asia.
Okay.
I like to frame it this way. For China, the Middle East is the show window. It's where they do their flashy public relations, look like global statesmen, and secure the raw fuel.
The show window. Got it.
But Southeast Asia, specifically countries like Vietnam, that is the cash register.
The show window and the cash register. That makes perfect sense. The Middle East provides the gas, but Southeast Asia is where they physically manufacture the microchips and the consumer goods that actually generate their revenue.
Precisely. And this is where it directly impacts the United States. The U.S. and China are currently locked in a brutal technological race, specifically around AI and the next generation of semiconductors.
Right. Everyone is talking about chips right now.
And Vietnam has become a critical contested node in that global supply chain. Even though China and Vietnam have decades of historical tension and border disputes, China is pushing incredibly hard right now to link their rail systems, their digital networks, and their tech manufacturing bases.
Because they see what American companies are trying to do. Right now, so many major American brands are trying to move their factory operations out of China and into places like Vietnam to avoid U.S. tariffs and insulate themselves from political risks. They call it the China Plus One strategy.
Exactly. But let's look at how that actually plays out on the ground.
Okay.
If an American tech giant moves its smartphone assembly plant to Hanoi to escape tariffs, but the raw lithium for the batteries is mined by a Chinese state-backed company, and the microchips are processed in Shenzhen, and the physical trains carrying the finished goods to the port are operating on Chinese-owned rail networks.
Oh, man.
Has that American company actually escaped?
No, They haven't escaped the Chinese ecosystem at all. They've just moved to a different room in the exact same house. They are still entirely dependent on Beijing's infrastructure to get their product to the shelf.
That is the trap. If China successfully integrates Vietnam's manufacturing power into its own digital and physical ecosystem, it makes it functionally impossible for the U.S. economy to completely decouple from Chinese technology.
Yeah.
The supply chains become so hopelessly intertwined that American tariffs lose their bite.
That is wild to think about. I mean, we've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with empty peace plans in the UAE, moved to $50 billion trade deficits in Spain, looked at the financial lifelines in Russia, and ended up with the semiconductor supply chain trap in Vietnam.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. So for the everyday American listening to this right now, someone who is just trying to make sense of the markets, maybe keep an eye on their 401k, or just understand what is happening to the global economy, what should they actually be watching?
Well, based on all the data and the structural shifts we've analyzed today, there are three very clear, actionable takeaways for anyone trying to navigate this new landscape.
Okay, let's hear them.
Number one, ignore the speeches and watch the money.
I feel like that should be the golden rule for all investing.
It truly is the golden rule of geopolitics, too.
Yeah.
Do not get distracted by the dramatic headlines about new global orders or historic peace talks. Those are designed to capture your attention.
Right.
Watch where the capital is physically flowing. Right now, the data shows Chinese capital is aggressively flowing into Middle Eastern green energy like hydrogen and EV infrastructure and into Southeast Asian microchip manufacturing.
So follow the cash.
Yes, if you're an investor, you need to recognize that these regions are quietly forming a new, highly integrated economic corridor that is specifically designed to bypass traditional Western financial hubs.
Okay, ignore the speeches, watch the capital flows. What is takeaway number two?
Number two, Europe is divided and you need to invest accordingly.
Divided how?
Well, for a long time, American investors have treated the European market as a single, unified economic bloc. You just bought a broad European index fund and called it a day. That is no longer the reality.
Right, because of situations like Spain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're going to see a severe divergence.
Yeah.
Companies located in European countries that actively engage with Chinese investment, like Spain, might receive a short-term premium.
Like getting access to massive new export markets for their agriculture or cheap capital to build out their local infrastructure.
Yes. But conversely, companies in European nations that take a harder security line alongside the U.S. might face retaliatory penalties or find themselves locked out of critical sectors like green tech.
Wow.
You can no longer just ask, should I invest in Europe? You have to ask, which Europe?
That fundamentally changes how an everyday investor should look at international diversification.
It does.
And what is the third and final takeaway?
Number three, watch the marine insurance premiums.
Wait, insurance premiums? That sounds incredibly specific. Why not just watch the price of a barrel of oil?
Because the price of oil can be manipulated by production cuts or political announcements. Marine insurance is the ultimate unfiltered truth teller of global stability.
Oh, that makes sense.
China is desperate to project this image of being a global stabilizer. But that status is entirely meaningless if the physical ships cannot move. Investors shouldn't be reading diplomatic transcripts from Beijing. They should be looking at the cost to insure an oil tanker navigating through the Strait of Hormuz.
Because insurance actuaries don't care about political talking points. They only care about actual risk.
Precisely. If the cost to insure a tanker carrying crude oil to a Chinese port suddenly skyrockets, the market is telling you in real time that China's much-hyped diplomacy has failed.
Right.
At the end of the day, all the smiling handshakes and photo ops in Beijing don't mean a thing if the supply chain breaks and the factories run out of gas. The physical flow of those ships is the only metric that matters.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. We started with a neighborhood watch captain handing out glossy flyers, and we've ended up uncovering a calculated blueprint for how global trade is being completely rewired from the ground up. You have really helped us separate the political window dressing from the actual cash register today.
It is always essential to look past the political theater. The money, the supply chains, and the data will always tell you the true story of where the world is heading.
They really do. And that leaves us with one final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on as you go about your day. We've talked extensively about how China is using this exact moment of global distraction, while the U.S. is heavily focused on domestic America First policies and managing other conflicts to quietly rewire the world's energy supply and tech manufacturing to run directly through Beijing instead of Washington. If they actually succeed in doing this over the next decade, if they successfully lock down the Gulf's oil and trap the Southeast Asian microchip supply chains,
Which is a very real possibility.
how will that shift change the price of every single item you buy at your local American store? When the underlying architecture of global trade changes hands, it doesn't just stay in the realm of high-level diplomacy. It eventually shows up right there on your grocery receipt. Think about that the next time you hear a passing news story about a distant diplomatic meeting. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button.